My name is Michael Carter. I'm 32 years old, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty normal life. My wife, Jessica, and I had been married for 3 years. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had each other, and I thought that was enough. We lived in a small apartment in Chicago, working hard to make ends meet. I worked at a car repair shop, and Jessica had a part-time job at a local coffee shop. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there all along. Jessica started acting differently about a year ago. She was always on her phone, texting late at night, and whenever I walked into the room, she would quickly put it down or turn the screen away. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, just social media or chatting with her friends. But as time went on, it became harder to ignore. She started buying expensive clothes and jewelry, things we couldn't afford on our budget. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she found good deals online or that a friend had given them to her. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, something felt off. Then, there were the sudden girls' nights out. Jessica had never been much of a social butterfly, but suddenly, she was going out every weekend. I asked her where she was going, and she would give vague answers, just out with the girls, or you wouldn't know the place. One night, my suspicion grew too strong to ignore. She left the apartment dressed in a tight red dress, heels that looked brand new, and makeup done as if she were going on a date. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So, I did something I never thought I would do. I decided to follow her. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then grabbed my jacket and took the car. Keeping a safe distance, I watched as she got into a black SUV waiting at the corner. My heart pounded. That wasn't an Uber or a taxi, it was a personal car. I followed them through the streets of Chicago until they pulled up to a fancy hotel downtown. A man stepped out of the SUV to open the door for her. He was older, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, dressed in a suit. Jessica smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in a long time. My stomach twisted. I felt sick. I parked down the street and watched as they walked into the hotel together, arm in arm. I wanted to run after them, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't move. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. That was the moment I knew. My wife was cheating on me. And I had no idea how deep the betrayal really went. I sat in my car outside that hotel for what felt like hours, my mind racing. My stomach churned with a mix of anger, disbelief, and a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. I wanted to storm in there, confront them, make a scene. But I knew that wouldn't change what I'd just seen. Instead, I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. I didn't sleep that night. Jessica came home around 3 a.m., smelling of expensive perfume and alcohol. She slipped into bed beside me, acting as if nothing had happened. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, I made up my mind, I needed proof. It wasn't just about confronting her. I needed undeniable evidence, something she couldn't lie her way out of. I started paying closer attention. I checked our bank statements and noticed large cash deposits every few weeks. Jessica didn't have a job that paid that much. Where was the money coming from? Then, I did something that made me feel sick to my stomach. While she was in the shower, I went through her phone. At first, it was just normal messages with her friends, but then I found a hidden conversation under a fake contact name, Sarah's dad. I clicked on it. And there it was. Messages, hotel reservations, bank transfers. Jessica had been meeting with this man for months. His real name was Robert Sullivan, the father of one of her old college friends. A wealthy businessman who had no problem throwing money around. And my wife was accepting it. I read through the texts, my heart pounding in my chest. Robert *** had a great time last night. Hope you liked the necklace. Asterisk. Jessica of course. You always spoil me, can't wait for next time. Asterisk. Robert same place, next Friday. Asterisk. Jessica you know I'll be there. I felt like I was going to be sick. It wasn't just an affair, it was something worse. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was selling herself for money, sneaking off to hotels while I worked late shifts to keep our home together. I put the phone down and walked out of the apartment, my hands shaking. I needed air. I needed to think. But one thing was clear. This marriage was over. I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. My hands trembled, my chest felt tight, and my mind replayed everything I had just seen on Jessica's phone. The texts, the money, the hotel visits, it was all there, undeniable. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, had been betraying me in the worst possible way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, break something, do anything to make this nightmare feel less real. But no matter what I did, the truth wouldn't change. Jessica had sold herself to another man. And not just any man, Robert Sullivan. A wealthy, well-connected businessman who could probably buy and sell people like me without a second thought. I had met him once, years ago, at a party Jessica dragged me to. I remembered shaking his hand, thinking he was just another rich guy who had nothing in common with us. I never thought, in a million years, that he would become the man who destroyed my marriage. I couldn't sit there any longer. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from her own lips, to see if she had even the slightest bit of shame for what she had done. I stormed back into the apartment, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Jessica was in the kitchen, casually sipping coffee like she hadn't just spent the night in another man's bed. She looked up at me, startled by the noise. "Michael?" she asked, setting her mug down. "What's wrong?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't even feel like my own. "What's wrong?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You really want to play dumb right now?" She frowned, crossing her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tossed it onto the table. "Go ahead," I said. "Read it." Jessica hesitated, then picked up the phone. The moment she saw the messages, her face paled. She swallowed hard, setting the phone back down. "I can explain," she whispered. I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. "Explain." "Explain what, Jessica?" "That you've been sneaking off to hotels with some rich old man while I'm busting my ass to provide for us." My voice cracked with anger, with betrayal, with something I couldn't even name. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. "You don't understand, Michael," she said, her voice shaking. "We were struggling. We had bills piling up, we barely had enough to get by, and you thought the solution was to sell yourself to Robert Sullivan." I shouted. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" Jessica wiped at her tears, but I didn't feel sympathy for her. "Not anymore. I did it for us," she said weakly. "For our future." I let out a harsh laugh. "For us? Don't you dare try to make this about me. This was never about us. This was about you. About the money. About the thrill. If you needed help, you should have come to me. We could have figured it out together. But instead, you chose this." Silence filled the room. Jessica stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice like steel. Her head snapped up. "Michael, please, no," I cut her off. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The woman I had loved, the woman I had promised my life to, was gone. All that was left was a stranger. And I wanted nothing to do with her. The day I walked out of that apartment, I knew there was no turning back. Jessica had tried to call me, text me, even showed up at my job once, begging me to talk. But there was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I found a lawyer the next day. A guy named Daniel Harper, sharp, experienced, and exactly the kind of man I needed on my side. When I told him what had happened, he nodded like he had seen it all before. "This is going to be messy," he warned me, leaning back in his chair. "Your wife, does she have her own income?" "She works part-time at a coffee shop," I said bitterly. "Barely brings in anything." He sighed. "Then she's going to fight for everything she can. Alimony, half your savings, maybe even your truck." I clenched my jaw. She cheated. That should mean something. "It does," he said. "But Illinois is a no-fault divorce state. Doesn't matter why the marriage ended, courts will still divide everything fairly." I nearly laughed. There was nothing fair about this. A few days later, Jessica was served with the divorce papers. I half expected her to explode, to scream, to cause a scene. Instead, she played the victim. She got herself a lawyer too, some high-end guy I knew I couldn't afford. And just like Daniel predicted, she demanded everything. "I sacrificed so much for this marriage," she wrote in one of the legal statements. "I supported Michael through difficult times. I deserve financial security." Financial security? She had been paid for months by Robert Sullivan. Where was my security? My dignity? But the worst part came when she tried to twist the story. One day, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was tense. "Jessica's lawyer is pushing a narrative," he said. "She's claiming you were emotionally abusive." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" "She's saying you were controlling, that you made her feel isolated, that she turned to Robert because she felt neglected." I gripped the edge of my desk, rage boiling inside me. "That's a damn lie." "I know," Daniel said. "But this isn't about truth. It's about what she can prove, or at least make believable in court." That's when I realized Jessica wasn't just trying to take my money. She was trying to ruin me. I had spent 3 years loving this woman, believing we were a team. And now, she was dragging my name through the mud to justify her own betrayal. I wasn't going to let her win. The fight was on. The divorce process turned into a full-scale war. Jessica wasn't just trying to take what I had, she was trying to destroy me. Her lawyer painted a picture of me as a controlling husband who had pushed her into another man's arms. It was a disgusting lie, but I knew that in court, the truth didn't always matter. What mattered was who could make their story sound more believable. I sat in the courtroom, gripping the edge of the table while her lawyer spoke. "Mrs. Carter endured years of emotional neglect," he said, pacing dramatically. "She felt trapped in a marriage where she was constantly belittled and ignored. She had no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Every word was a knife in my back. Jessica sat there, dabbing fake tears from her eyes, playing the victim like she deserved an Oscar. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Daniel stood, straightened his suit, and walked to the center of the room. He spoke calmly, but there was steel in his voice. "My client worked long hours to provide for his wife," he said. "He sacrificed sleep, time, and his own happiness to make sure she had a roof over her head. And what did she do in return?" He turned, looking straight at Jessica. "She sold herself to another man." Jessica's face turned red. Her lawyer objected, saying there was no proof that she had taken money from Robert Sullivan. Daniel smiled. "No proof? Your Honor, I'd like to submit bank statements showing multiple cash deposits into Mrs. Carter's account, all matching dates when she checked into hotels with Mr. Sullivan." A murmur went through the courtroom. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The evidence was there. The judge saw it. The lies Jessica had tried to weave were unraveling right in front of her. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The judge ruled that Jessica was not entitled to any alimony. She wouldn't be getting a dime from me. Not my truck. Not my savings. Nothing. Her mouth fell open in shock. She had walked into that courtroom thinking she was going to walk away with half of everything I owned. Instead, she got exactly what she deserved, nothing star. When the hearing ended, she stormed out without even looking at me. But I didn't care. I had won. The final paperwork came through a few weeks later. With a single signature, I was free. I took a deep breath, staring at the papers in my hands. 3 years of marriage, gone. 3 years of love, trust, and devotion, shattered. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. I was done with Jessica. Done with the lies, the betrayal, the pain. I wasn't the same man I was when this all started. I had been broken, humiliated, dragged through the dirt. But I had survived. And now? Now, it was time to rebuild my life. Without her.